Welcome to Actuaries in the Wild podcast. I started this podcast because I believe that actuaries are more than just your stereotypical number cruncher that sits at a computer all day.
Mhm.
Many of us have endeavors that go beyond the traditional actuarial realm. My goal is to meet those actuaries who have ventured from their desks to explore their passions. It's time to meet the actuaries in the wild. Today's actuary in the wild is Chelsea Adler. Welcome, Chelsea.
Thanks, Jeremy. Happy to be joining you.
I want to start by finding out a little bit of information about your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself, including what made you decide to become an actuary and about your actuarial career.
Sure. Um, so I first heard about the actuarial profession when I was a sophomore in high school. I was the biggest, what I would consider a self-proclaimed nerd. I
Mhm.
loved math so much, and I took a statistics class my sophomore year that I just loved so much that I am not kidding when I say I read every single word of the textbook, like including the footnotes.
Yeah.
And it was in these footnotes that there was just like one comment that basically said, if you enjoy statistics, you should consider a career as an actuary. And so that seed was sort of planted. And then fast forward 2 years later, when I was a senior in high school, my parents were really encouraging me to decide what I wanted to major in. And actuary came back up again. My father is actually a State Farm agent, and so he was able to take me over to their headquarters
See.
and let me do like a job shadow for a day. And I still can't believe I had this reaction, but after sitting in cubicles with people for several hours, I walk out that day and I'm like 100% sold. I'm like,
Yeah.
yep, this is the job for me. This is what I want to do. And so I went to Ohio State for my undergrad. And I actually, another really big piece of my story is I was a synchronized swimmer for 15 years. So I competed on their, collegiate team for all 4 years of my time in college, and also studied for actuarial exams and went to classes, and then graduated with having done a couple of actuarial internships. I was about to accept a consulting internship that I like really loved. But at the same time, my now husband and I were getting close to engagement, and he had just accepted a job with State Farm in Bloomington, Illinois. And so
Hmm.
he wasn't super thrilled about the idea of us living in different states. So I said I would consider it and went over to State Farm, interviewed, and decided to take the job. Had a wonderful 5 years there to start off my career. All of that time was spent in homeowners pricing. And then about 3 years ago, I jumped into the insurtech world, and I've been working at Root Insurance, which really focuses on you know, cars and how we can use information about the way people drive to
Hmm.
rate them more accurately and fairly. So it has certainly been nothing short of an adventure ever since. And I'm just really grateful for all that I've been learning.
So, what makes you an actuary in the wild is that I would call you an actuarial social media influencer. What did you? How did you get started doing this?
Yeah, I still laugh hearing the term social media influencer. I don't know if that'll ever just get like normal for me, but yeah, I, for a lot of years, did not really personally engage in social media much at all. I am a very private person, and I have seen some of the negative aspects and just have intentionally kind of kept my distance. But it was shortly after I got my fellowship and that I was really reflecting on kind of where do I go from here? I really love this job, but I just feel called to give back and to do something, just good in the world, make a positive impact. And so it was a process throughout the pandemic of just really wrestling with like, what does next steps look
Mhm.
like? And also just, having more time to reflect, that I ultimately came to this idea of like, well, there's not a lot of things I know a lot about, but I know a lot about how to be a good actuary. And I
Right.
think that's something I can help people with. And so I felt as though, a blog could be a good way to get information out to people. At the time, this was such a scary endeavor for me. It was very outside of my comfort zone, and still a lot of it is.
Hmm.
But I felt like, what, this is something I can start with and again, get information to people in a safe way. And that's essentially how the blog was born.
So you mentioned the blog at inspiringactuaries.com is where it's located. What are
Yeah.
some of the things that you wrote about on your blog, and how has it evolved over time?
Yeah, so I started with what I would consider the basics of like, what is an actuary
Hmm.
and why is it such a great job? Also talked a little bit about, insurance and why it's necessary, and why people should actually love it instead of hate
Hmm.
it. Because I think those are the two things I'm like most passionate about, is just like changing people's perception of insurance as well as raising awareness for this really awesome profession. And over time, you know, I shared this with you last time we spoke, but my faith is super important to me, and that's a huge driver for why I started the blog. And I've really just tried to surrender this process to the Lord's leading, and just like really pray
Hmm.
about what I should be sharing. And so over time, I've continued to put out educational content, but then also, every once in a while, I'll feel very inspired to share like a personal story or something that I
Right,
hope will encourage others. So it's kind of a splattering of like whatever I just felt very inspired to write about.
right. And then you mentioned you have a YouTube channel.
Hmm.
Why did you start doing that when you already had the blog?
Yeah, so I personally use YouTube all the time. I think it is such a helpful resource. I think a lot of people do enjoy kind of video format for how they
Mhm.
learn. And so it was always kind of in the back of my mind of like, yeah, that could be a great place to continue to share content. But the reason I didn't start there is because the first time I tried to like self-record myself saying something, I almost
Mhm.
quit everything then and there. It was the most awkward experience.
Yeah,
And I was just like, I can't do this. So I started, with something smaller like the blog, pen and paper. And then once I got more comfortable and practiced a little bit, again, YouTube is something I always thought would be a very helpful way to get information to people. It just took a little bit of time for me to get
right.
comfortable.
And then you also you also have done some other things like TikTok. But I want to go back TikTok, but I want to go back to YouTube a little bit.
Yeah.
Who have been some of the most interesting people that you have interviewed, and why?
Oh my goodness. So I guess first and foremost, I have several interviews that I have recorded that I have not released yet. And we were just
Okay.
talking about how, you're so quick at getting these out there. And for me, the editing process just takes so long.
Hmm.
This is certainly not my specialty, but I hope this doesn't come as like a cop out answer, but I genuinely mean this when I say that everyone I've talked to is so interesting. And I think that's part of what I want to share with the platform, is that every single person has a unique
Hmm.
like plan and purpose for their life. And just because yours looks like different than someone else's, that's not a good or bad thing. Like it's
Right.
embracing your uniqueness. And I think that's why I really love what your podcast is all about, kind of embracing the unique aspects of us outside of the work that we do.
Right.
So truly, every single person I talk to, I just get so excited because they're all unique and they all have really cool stories. And it's just a matter of us being intentional to get to know people, to really like see that in others.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful people exploring their passions, and some people passions are their actuarial work, but
Yeah.
some people their passions are definitely different, and I think it's if you're living your passions and doing whatever your passion is, I think that's great. I mentioned that you have the TikTok videos. How do those differ from YouTube? I'm not someone who's gotten involved in TikTok. My daughter has said that I need to be more involved in TikTok. I haven't really gotten into that world yet. But how do those differ from YouTube, and what was your motivation for going into TikTok?
Yeah. So I think of all the things I've tried so far, venturing into the world of TikTok was probably the biggest leap of faith. I was initially kind of a hater of the platform,
Mhm.
only because my only exposure to it was, oh, isn't that just where people like dance and do funny things? And I was certainly not going to be doing any of
Mhm.
that. So it was shortly after realizing that, part of my target audience is the younger generation of people who are maybe in like high school or just entering college. And a lot of those people are primarily using TikTok.
Right.
And the best way to reach them is to meet them where they're at. So I had that realization and then started doing a lot of research. Truthfully, I researched the platform for probably about 6 months before I ever
Right.
posted anything. And I soon learned that there are a lot of educators that use the platform to share information in kind of bite-sized pieces. And I think it's kind of blown my mind at how effective it is in just kind of, I mean, the reality is people's attention spans are so short now.
Yeah.
You really have to be strategic about how do you get information out to people in creative and like fast-paced ways to where it like sinks in and they don't get bored halfway through. So it's been a really fun challenge for me, to kind of learn how to do that. And so I think the biggest difference is that, the longest video on TikTok, I think, is like 2, maybe 3 minutes, whereas YouTube can be much longer. So it's just short format education versus long format. And I think there's also kind of the element of like, there's trends that get picked up every once in a while. And so if you can tie in education to those as well, it can be even
I
more
see.
effective in reaching people.
I see. So you mentioned that faith is an important part of why you're doing this. How does your faith keep you motivated in serving the actual community in this way?
Hmm. I mean, it's truly just the driver of everything I do. I certainly have been reflecting a lot over the last few weeks, gearing up for the new year, and just really praying about like where I want to go with the blog.
Hmm.
And from day one, it's always been like, okay, Lord, I feel like you're calling me into this, and this is one way that I can like make a positive impact and give back. But I don't want to be prioritizing it above other more important aspects of my life. And so how do I balance that? Um, and so, yeah, I want to just try to be as authentic and real with people about, I think this is an awesome job that
Right.
I want so many people to know about because they could love it too. They could feel so, rewarded in this profession. But it's also not an easy road. And, especially going through actuarial exams and hopefully, helping people with the tools to be successful with them, but also coming alongside of them and saying, hey, look, like your identity is not in your performance. You do not have value because of whether you pass or fail an exam. And just reminding people of important truths and encouraging them and hopefully inspiring them to embrace their passions, whether it is an actuary or outside of being an actuary.
Right.
Like I just want to be more than anything else like someone who people are just encouraged by and reminded of the Lord's love through.
And that's something I agree with. I've very much am driven by some of those same things in my life too, and it's encouraging to see that you're doing that too. I mentioned your blog is at inspiringactuaries.com. Where else can people find you?
Yeah, so I have the website, and then I primarily use LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok as like the main platforms. In terms of like if people have specific questions, you can send me a direct message on Instagram or LinkedIn. I think either of those are great avenues. So yeah, there's a couple of options.
And you mentioned some of the things in your blog. You started out, what an actuary is, or things like that. But what are future topics that you're thinking about covering that you haven't done yet?
Mm. Oh my goodness. So this sort of goes back to the multiple videos I have recorded that I have yet to release. I have so many blogs that I've started and I just need to
Mhm.
finish. I think the most requested one and one that I will probably try to prioritize sooner rather than later is like a very comprehensive study tips blog. I have an abbreviated version out there that's really focused on like the last month before exams, but this one I want to be like start to
I
finish
see.
literally everything I know and what helped me and didn't. So I really just need to like finish that one. And then another one that the Lord has really put on my heart is just, especially for people who want to make a positive impact in their workplace, whether faith is important to them or not, how can they live out those convictions that they have in a corporate environment? I think that's
Hmm.
really scary for some people. And there's also, I think, this misconception that like you have to be talking about Jesus or you have to say specific words to be sharing the gospel or sharing your faith. But the reality is, there's so many things about how you can operate just as a kind, loving individual
Right,
in the workplace that is, not only sharing your faith and making a positive impact, but those are qualities that a company would want in their employees.
right.
And so just kind of breaking down those barriers and helping people see how they are making an impact even when they don't see it, and little ways that they can encourage and also just love other people well through things that they do at their job.
Well, thank you, Chelsea, for being my guest on Actuaries in the Wild. I really enjoyed
Of
this
course.
discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. And thank you for all that you're doing as well to highlight what actuaries do outside of their day job. I think it's amazing. So, yeah, thank you for having me on.
Well, thanks. If you're an actuary or know an actuary who has ventured out into the wild, contact me so I can share your story. You can find Actuaries in the Wild on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us and see you next time on Actuaries in the Wild.